Sam sat very still in the long white hallway of the hospital, a small stick figure folded onto a hard plastic chair, staring down at his own two hands as if he had never really seen them before. The lights hummed above him. A clock ticked somewhere down the corridor, and behind the closed door in front of him, a doctor was quietly saying a single word to his father, a word Sam had spent his entire life believing belonged to other families, on other streets, in other stories. The word was cancer. What made his chest feel tight and hollow at the very same time was not only the fear, it was a memory, and it chose that exact moment to rise up in front of him clear as an old film. He was 7 years old again, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, close enough to the television that his mother kept telling him to move back. His father knelt behind him with two warm hands resting on his small shoulders. On the flickering screen, two ghostly figures in white suits bounced in slow motion across the surface of the moon, 250,000 miles away, and his father leaned down close to his ear and said the sentence Sam would carry for almost 50 years. "If human beings can do that, son," he whispered, "then we can beat anything, anything at all." And now, Sam sat in a hospital hallway 5 decades later, a grown man with gray coming into his hair, staring at a closed door, wondering for the first time in his whole life whether his father had been wrong. That word behind the door had a history, and as Sam sat there, his frightened mind reached for it the way a falling person reaches for a railing. He remembered learning, somewhere across the years, that in the very same era as that moon landing, his country had done something extraordinary and full of hope. In the year 1971, the President of the United States had sat at a great desk with the cameras rolling and signed a law. And the promise glowing behind that law was every bit as bright as the rockets themselves. They would do to cancer exactly what they had done to the moon. They would gather the finest minds in the world, they would pour in the money, they would aim the entire will of a nation at this disease, and they would defeat it once and for all. People truly called it, without a trace of irony, the war on cancer. And to everyone alive then, it made perfect sense. They had just crossed 250,000 miles of empty black space and walked on another world. Surely a sickness that lived inside the small, warm space of the human body was a smaller thing than the moon. But Sam was a grown man now, sitting in a hospital more than 50 years after that pen touched that paper. And he knew how the story had actually gone. Half a century had passed, the money had come, and not in the millions, but in the hundreds of billions. The brilliant minds had come, generation after generation of them. And still, every single year, cancer took the lives of around 10 million people across the world. It remained the second leading cause of death on the entire planet. The treatments had improved, truly and genuinely improved. People lived longer and suffered less than they once had. And yet that one clean, shining word everybody wanted, the word cure, still refused to sit comfortably in a sentence about most cancers, unless a dozen careful qualifications came clinging along with it. Sam pressed his two stick-figure hands against his eyes, and he asked the question that millions of frightened people had asked in hallways just like this one. The question that felt like anger and grief braided tightly together. "We beat the moon," he thought. "We spent everything. So why, after all this time, can we still not beat this?" When the door finally opened, a second stick figure stepped out into the hallway. She was older, unhurried, drawn in a few calm lines, with a white coat and a pair of small round glasses balanced on the dot of her nose. This was his father's doctor. Sam shot up out of his chair far too fast, and every question that had been boiling in him for hours came pouring out as only one. "Why?" he said, and his voice cracked on the single word. "We have all the money in the world for this. We have armies of scientists. Why is there still no cure?" He fully expected her to glance away, or to hand him one of those smooth and empty comforts that people give when there is nothing real to say. Instead, the doctor did something no one had done for Sam that entire, long, and terrible day. She sat back down on the hard plastic chairs, patted the seat beside her, folded her hands in her lap, and decided to tell him the truth. "What I am about to explain," she said gently, "is the most important thing most people are never told clearly. And once you truly understand it, you will never see this disease the same way again. Sam, cancer did not break into your father's body. Cancer is your father's body. It is his own cells. running his own biology, following rules that were written into him long before he was ever born. Sam did not understand, and the doctor could see it plainly on his face. So she reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a pen, and began to draw on a paper napkin, the way every good teacher eventually does. "Picture a germ," she said, and with a few quick strokes, she drew a little invader, a stick figure shaded dark, jagged and lopsided, standing out sharply in a crowd of pale, tidy, ordinary stick figures. "When a bacteria or a virus gets inside you," she said, "it is a stranger. It is built differently than you are. It carries foreign flags on its surface, little signals that scream, 'I do not belong here.' And your body keeps an army whose entire job is to spot the stranger in the crowd. The line between what is you and what is not you is bright and clear, so your soldiers know exactly who to grab and drag away. That is the whole reason we can fight off so many infections. The enemy is kind enough to wear a different face." Then she turned the napkin over and drew a second picture, and this one made Sam's stomach slowly turn over. It was a crowd of pale stick figures, and every single one of them was identical, drawn with the exact same lines. "Now," she said quietly, "find the cancer." Sam leaned in and searched the little crowd. He looked and looked. He could not do it. "That," she said, "is the entire tragedy of this disease. A cancer cell is not a stranger. It is one of your own, wearing your own face, built from your own materials, protected by the very same walls as everything your body is desperately trying to keep alive. To kill it, you have to kill a piece of yourself, and you have to hit exactly that piece without harming the millions of innocent neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder with it, every one of them wearing the identical face. That," she said, setting down her pen, "is one of the hardest targeting problems in the entire history of medicine." Sam thought of the long chemical word he had heard drifting through the door: chemotherapy. He asked her, almost in a whisper, what it actually did. The pen moved again. "Cancer cells share one stubborn habit," she said. "They divide fast. They copy themselves and multiply far more quickly than the calm, ordinary cells around them. So for a very long time now, our main weapon has been a kind of poison that hunts down anything dividing quickly." She drew a small bomb falling into the crowd of identical figures, and around the blast, she drew a ring, catching everyone inside it. "Here is the cruelty hidden in that," she said. "Cancer divides fast, yes, so the poison finds it. But your hair divides fast too. The soft lining of your stomach and your gut divides fast. The blood in your bones, the very immune cells we were just talking about, all of them divide fast. And the drug cannot read anyone's name. It cannot tell friend from enemy. It can only see the behavior, the fast dividing, and it strikes down everyone it catches in the act." She looked at Sam with real tenderness. "That is why your father is going to lose his hair. That is why he is going to feel so sick and so weak. It is not that the treatment is clumsy or careless. It is that the target and the innocent bystander are doing the exact same thing, and they are made of the exact same stuff." Sam sank back into the chair, and he felt his hot anger cooling into something heavier and far sadder. It was not that nobody had tried hard enough. It was that the problem itself was shaped like a trap. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Sam stared at the closed door of his father's room, and he thought about all the times in his life he had heard people say that someone had lost their battle with cancer, as though the person simply had not fought hard enough, as though courage alone could have tipped the scales. He saw now how cruel and how untrue that quiet little phrase really was. His father had not failed at anything. His father had run headlong into one of the oldest and hardest walls in all of nature. "Tell me the rest," Sam said at last, wiping his eyes with the back of one hand. "I would rather understand the truth than be comforted by things that are not real." And the doctor nodded slowly, as if he had just passed some small and important test. The doctor could see him sinking, so instead of leaving him in the dark, she offered him the one thing that is always better than despair, which is understanding. "Come with me," she said. And she did not even stand up. She only tapped the napkin. "Let us go inside. Imagine the two of us shrinking down, smaller than a speck of dust, smaller than that, until we can float right into your father's body and look around." And Sam, sitting in that hard chair with his eyes half closed, let himself imagine exactly that. All at once, the two of them were tiny stick figures drifting through a vast, warm, glowing city, a city of cells, 37 trillion of them, more cells, in this one man than there are stars you could ever hope to count. All of them lit up, all of them busy at their work. Every one of these, the doctor said, sweeping her arm across the glowing city, carries a complete instruction book, and that book is 3 billion letters long. And every single time one of these cells makes a copy of itself, to heal a cut or to replace something old and worn, it has to copy all 3 billion of those letters, one by one. Sam watched a nearby cell begin to divide, watched the frantic, breathless copying, and there, right in front of him, he saw it. Little mistakes, tiny typos, one here, a handful there, every single time, without fail. It is not because the cell is sloppy, the doctor said softly. It is because being perfect 3 billion times in a row is simply impossible. Somewhere between 1 and 10 little errors slip through with every copy. And your body performs this act of copying trillions upon trillions of times across a single human life. Then why, Sam asked, turning to her in the glowing city, are we not all riddled with cancer from the day we are born? Because, she said, and here at last she smiled, your body is a magnificent fortress, and it is full of guards. Watch. And she showed him. She showed him the tumor suppressor genes, and she drew them as steady stick figures, standing at the great machinery of the cell, with their hands resting on enormous levers, ready to slam on the brakes, the instant a cell began to divide too eagerly. She showed him the proofreaders, tiny patient editors walking slowly along the lines of freshly copied letters, spotting the typos and quietly fixing them before anyone could be harmed. She showed him the one that moved Sam the most of all, a cell so badly damaged that it could never be safely repaired, and rather than risk becoming a danger to the body it loved, that cell calmly folded its own hands and chose to die, on purpose, for the good of everyone around it. That, said the doctor, has a name. We call it apoptosis. Sam thought the word sounded almost like a prayer, and then, above all of them, she showed him the immune patrol, roaming the glowing streets of the city day and night, checking face after face, and whenever they found a cell behaving strangely, quietly pulling it aside and ending it before it could ever grow into something terrible. So you see, the doctor said, cancer is not one single thing going wrong. It is many guards failing, one after another, over years and years, sometimes over whole decades. And she drew it slowly, so that Sam would feel the true weight of it. First one, breaks. The cell is still almost normal. Then a proofreader is lost, and now the typos start to pile up uncorrected. Then the noble self-destruct switch stops working. So a cell that truly should have died gets to keep on living instead. Then the signal that tells the cell when to stop growing falls silent. One by one, slowly, quietly, over a very long time, a single cell collects hundreds of these failures, each one loosening another rule, until at last a cell is born that has forgotten every limit it was ever given. It grows and never stops. It refuses to die. It tricks the surrounding body into building fresh blood vessels to feed it. And in the end, worst of all, it learns to travel. That, the doctor said, tapping the napkin, is your enemy, not an invader who kicked down the front door. A citizen born and raised inside the city who slowly and quietly stopped obeying every single law, using nothing but the body's own tools to do it. But there is one more idea, the doctor said, and this one changed how scientists understand this disease more than anything else has in the last 20 years. She leaned in close, as if sharing a secret. A tumor is not a lump of identical copies just sitting there quietly waiting for us. A tumor is alive with competition, and she drew it now not as a neat cluster, but as a shoving, restless crowd of slightly different stick figures, each one a little unlike its neighbors, all of them jostling, all of them racing. Inside a tumor, she said, the cells compete against one another, exactly the way animals compete out in the wild. The one that happens to grow a little faster seizes more room and more food, and its descendants take over the neighborhood. The tumor is evolving, right there inside your father's body, growing better and better at the one thing it does, which is surviving. Sam felt a cold thread run down his spine, and then the doctor told him the cruelest consequence of all. When we attack a tumor with a drug, she said, we kill almost all of it. But almost is the whole heartbreak of it. She drew the little bomb again, falling into that shoving crowd. And this time, when the smoke cleared away, a few stick figures were still standing, the rare ones who by pure blind chance had been born just a little tougher, just a little more resistant to that exact poison. And now, she said, all of their weaker rivals are gone. We cleared the whole field for them. They multiply in peace. And the tumor that grows back is descended entirely from those survivors, the very ones our drug could never touch. We did not only fight the cancer. Without ever meaning to, we bred a stronger one. Sam stared at the picture for a long moment. So, the treatment, he said slowly, almost afraid of the words, can actually teach it how to win. Sometimes, the doctor answered. Yes, that is the trap hidden inside the trap. Sam sat back, stunned, and for the first time, the sheer size of the thing settled over him, not as anger now, but as something closer to awe. He had walked into this hospital picturing cancer as a brutish, mindless thing, a lump, a rot, a simple and stupid cruelty. He was beginning to see instead that it was something almost unbearably clever, a living process obeying the very same deep laws that had shaped every creature which ever swam or crawled or flew across the whole history of the earth, only running now in the wrong direction, inside the one person he loved most in all the world. And there is something else buried inside that little phrase everyone uses so easily, the doctor went on. Cure cancer. As though it named a single thing, she shook her head slowly. Cancer is not one disease, Sam. It is more than 200 different diseases. And the only real thing they all share is that same broken habit, growing without any control. And she drew them as a great, sprawling crowd, every figure a different shape and size. The cancer that begins in the lung, and the cancer that begins in the blood, and the one in the breast, and the one deep in the brain, and the one in the skin. These are not different masks on a single enemy. They are entirely different enemies, with different weapons, different hiding places, different weaknesses, different habits. Asking for one single cure for cancer, she said, is very much like asking for one single cure for pneumonia and tuberculosis and asthma all at once, simply because all three of them happen to live in the lungs. And it runs even deeper than that, she told him, her voice dropping. Even two people given the very same name for their disease, the same stage, the same organ, the same words on the same chart, can be carrying tumors that are completely different on the inside. So different that the exact treatment, which saves the life of one of them, might do nothing whatsoever for the other. That gentle little word cure, she said, has been hiding 200 separate problems behind a single hopeful sound this whole time. And Sam understood, finally, why that word cure had felt so slippery every single time a headline had promised it to him over the years. You could no more cure cancer with one thing than you could win 200 entirely different chess games with a single clever move. Each board was its own puzzle, with its own opponent, its own traps, its own long night of careful thinking. That, she said, is exactly why the newest and most hopeful road is also one of the hardest. We can now read the precise instruction book of one person's precise tumor, find the exact mistakes that are driving it forward, and design a treatment aimed at those exact mistakes and nothing else. She drew a key being carefully cut to fit one single lock. When it works, she said, it is a beautiful thing to see. But it is slow, and it costs an enormous fortune, and there is a catch inside it that breaks the heart a little. Remember that the tumor is always evolving. So, while we are busy reading it and carefully cutting our perfect key, the lock itself is already changing shape. By the time we slide the key into the door, the tumor has shifted, and the door no longer opens the way it did just 1 month before. We are aiming, she said, at a target that keeps moving even while the arrow is still in the air. Sam sat with all of this, and then he asked the question that had been quietly growing in him this whole time. The army, he said. That immune patrol you showed me, walking the streets, checking every face. Why does it not simply kill the cancer? It should, the doctor said, and her eyes brightened. And here is something that will truly amaze you. Most of the time, it does. Almost every cancer that ever so much as begins to form is spotted and destroyed by that faithful patrol, long before it becomes anything at all. You yourself have probably killed 1,000 tiny would-be cancers in your life without ever knowing a thing about it. The ones that grow into a real disease are the rare and clever few that discovered a way to hide. and she drew, one by one, the tricks they use. Some cancer cells learn to raise a little white flag on their surface, a chemical signal that means, "Do not attack me. I am one of the good ones." The soldier reads that flag, lowers its weapon, and walks right on past. Worse still, some tumors capture the soldiers themselves and turn them, whispering to the guards until the guards begin protecting the very thing they were sent to destroy. Around itself, the tumor builds a quiet, sleepy zone where the whole army simply lies down and dozes off. And this, the doctor said, and now her voice truly lifted, is where we have made some of the most thrilling progress in the entire history of this long fight. Someone asked a wonderful question. What if, instead of pouring in poison ourselves, we could simply wake the sleeping army back up? And she drew a scientist stick figure, carefully snipping away that little white flag, and the instant it was gone, the drowsy soldiers snapped awake, sprang to their feet, and fell upon the tumor with everything they had. "We call this immunotherapy," she said, "and for some people, it has done things that honestly look like miracles. There are people who were told they had only months left to live who are alive and well many years later, their cancer simply gone, hunted down, and finished by their own reawakened cells." Sam felt hope rise sharp and sudden in his chest, almost painful. "Then why," he asked, his voice climbing, "is not everyone saved this way?" "Because," she said, laying a gentle hand on his arm, "it only works for perhaps 20 to 40 out of every 100 people who try it, and only against certain cancers. The rest have learned to hide in ways this particular key cannot yet reach. And there is a price to pay. When you cut the brakes off an army, sometimes that army does not stop at the enemy. Sometimes it turns and attacks the healthy body too, and begins to harm the very person you were fighting to save. Those brakes we so cleverly cut," Sam realized aloud, "they were put there for a reason in the first place." "They were," she agreed. "To keep the army from ever turning on you. There is no clean and painless solution here. There is only a very hard trade, made with open eyes." Sam frowned, struggling to hold it all together in his head. "But why?" he asked. "Would the body ever build an army that can be fooled so easily in the first place?" "It seems like a terrible design," the doctor smiled, "because it was exactly the right question to ask. Because that same army," she said, "is walking a razor's edge every second of your life. If it is too gentle, a cancer or an infection slips right through and kills you. But if it is too fierce, it begins tearing into your own healthy flesh, your joints, your nerves, your organs, and that becomes its own kind of terrible disease. So the body struck a careful balance long ago, aggressive enough to defend you, restrained enough not to devour you. And cancer," she said, "is a thief that found that balance and learned to hide inside the restraint, wrapping itself in the very mercy that keeps the rest of you alive. To tear that mercy away and force the army to attack is to risk the whole body turning against itself. Nearly every gift in this fight," she said quietly, "arrives with a knife hidden in its hand." Now, Sam asked the question he had been the most afraid to ask all day. "What is it," he said slowly, "that actually kills a person?" "The first tumor," the doctor said, "the original one, where it all began, is very often not the thing that takes a life. We can frequently cut it out with surgery. We can burn it away with focused radiation. The true danger begins when a few cells break away from that first tumor and set off traveling." And she drew it like a jailbreak from a walled city. A handful of stick figures slip out through a crack in the wall, throw themselves into the rushing red river of the bloodstream, and go tumbling along it. Most of them die on that terrible journey, torn apart or caught by the patrol. But a few, a stubborn and unlucky few, survive the river, crawl out onto some distant shore, an organ far from home, and there they begin to build the whole nightmare all over again. "When cancer has spread like that," she said, "into the liver and the lungs and the bones all at the same time, you are no longer fighting one enemy in one place. You are fighting 3 or 4 separate enemies, each in a different country, each a little different from the others, each learning to resist your weapons entirely on its own. That," she said, "is what makes the late fight so brutally hard to win." Every step of that escape is a small miracle of survival for the cancer. It must tear itself free of the first tumor. endure the violent river of the blood, slip past the immune patrol the entire way, force its way into a new and foreign tissue, survive in a place with different rules, and then, against all odds, wake back up and start to grow. Each one of those steps is a place where we might try to stop it, and not one of them is easy to block without also breaking some ordinary and necessary thing the healthy body does every single day. Sam thought of a city he had once loved, and of what it would mean for a fire to leap across the river and catch in 3 new neighborhoods all at once, each one too far from the others for anyone to fight them all. And he understood, in a sudden and sinking way, why the doctors spoke about catching things early with such quiet urgency in their voices. It was not caution for its own sake. It was that once the sparks were loose and riding the wind, no single bucket of water in the world could ever again be enough. And there was one last cruelty she had to tell him about, she said, because it was the very reason doctors chose their words so carefully. Some of those traveling cells, when they finally reach a new place, do not start growing right away. Instead, they go to sleep. And she drew a single, small stick figure curled up in a dark and distant corner, perfectly still, perfectly silent, invisible to every scan we can point at it, untouched by every drug that only knows how to hunt the active and the dividing. It can sleep like that for years, she said. Sometimes for 10 years, sometimes for 20. A person can be told they are free at last, can weep with relief, can celebrate, can slowly begin to forget the whole ordeal. And then one day, for reasons we still do not fully understand, the sleeper simply wakes. That, she said, is why we so rarely allow ourselves to say that plain and beautiful word cured, and why instead we say careful things like 5 years now with no sign of its return. It is not because we want to steal anyone's hope. It is because we have learned the hard way and many times over to respect what this disease is truly capable of. Sam was quiet for a long while after that. Then he said something that had quietly bothered him for years. "I have read the headlines," he said. "Every few months I see one. Scientists cure cancer in mice. A stunning new breakthrough. And then you never hear a single word about it again. Were they all lying to us?" "No," the doctor said, and she said it firmly, without hesitation. "They were not lying. They really did cure it. In the mouse. It truly happened." And then she explained to him the heartbreaking gap that has disappointed so many hopeful people. A mouse in a laboratory, she said, is a simple thing. Its tumor is neat and uniform, grown on purpose in a controlled way, every part of it the same as every other part. The mouse itself is young, and nearly identical to every other mouse in the tray beside it. But your father is not a mouse. His tumor is a wild, messy, evolving thing, decades in the making, every corner of it a little different from the next, growing inside a body with its own long and complicated history of a life fully lived. The very same things we do to make an experiment clean and clear and easy to read, she said, are the very things that make it quietly lie to us about what will happen inside a real human being. And she was not bitter about it, not at all. The scientists know this, she said. They understand the gap. And they are building better and better models every single year, growing tiny living pieces of real human tumors in the lab, teaching powerful computers to predict how the wild version will truly behave. The gap is closing, slowly. It has simply never closed completely, because you cannot fit the whole enormous, messy truth of a human life inside a single laboratory dish. And then the doctor did something that changed the entire feeling in that gray hallway. She set down her pen, looked Sam full in the face, and said, "Now, let me tell you the part that should give you real and solid hope, because it is the most powerful thing of all, and yet almost nobody ever talks about it. It is not a new drug at all. It is time." And she drew 2 versions of the very same tumor side by side. "The single most important thing that decides whether a person lives," she said, "is not how fierce or how clever their cancer is. It is how early we manage to find it. Look here. A breast cancer, caught at its very first stage, leaves more than 90 out of every 100 people alive and well 5 years later. That very same cancer, caught late, after it has already spread out through the body, drops to below 30 out of 100. Same disease, Sam." The only thing that changed between those 2 numbers was the clock. Sam leaned forward, and something began to lift in him. So, the whole game, he said. The real game. It is finding it early. That is the game, she said, and her voice was warm and certain. And it is the game we can actually win right now, with the tools already in our hands. Then she told him about the newest hope of all, a simple test, just a small draw of blood that can catch the faint traces a hidden tumor sheds into the bloodstream long before a person ever feels the smallest thing wrong. Tests are being built and studied at this very moment that may one day find many different cancers early from nothing more than a single vial of blood. The hard part is making them exact, she said. Sensitive enough to catch the real and tiny early cancers, but careful enough not to frighten millions of perfectly healthy people with false alarms. But the direction is real, and it is hopeful in a way that treatment alone has never quite managed to be. And Sam thought of his father, and of all the ordinary quiet years when nothing at all had seemed to be wrong, and he realized with a small shock that all that plain and ordinary time had secretly been the most precious battlefield of the entire war, and that no one had ever once thought to tell them so. Finding it early does not change the deep biology of the disease, she said. But it lets the treatments we already have actually work. It hands us back the one precious thing this disease has always tried to steal. Time. There was one more honest thing the doctor wanted Sam to understand, even though it was an uncomfortable thing to say out loud. You asked me, back at the start, where all the money goes, she said. So, let me tell you how the money tends to think. Building just one new cancer drug can cost $2 or $3 billion before it ever reaches a single patient, and money that large always wants to find its way back home. So, the people who fund these efforts lean, without anyone in the story being a villain, toward treatments they can sell again and again to a great many patients, rather than toward prevention, because the person who never gets cancer in the first place never even knows they were saved, and so they cannot be thanked and they cannot be billed. She said it plainly and without anger. It leans toward drugs that add a few good months to a life, because a few good months can be carefully measured and clearly proven. It leans toward small, safe, publishable steps, because those steps are what keep the funding flowing for the next year. None of this is a monster, Sam. It is simply that the great machine built around the science has a shape of its own, and that shape quietly decides which good ideas get chased quickly and which get chased slowly, no matter what the biology itself might actually need most. Sam nodded slowly. He had spent the whole day wanting someone to blame. Instead, he was being handed something harder and far truer than blame. But do not you dare let me leave you thinking that we are losing, the doctor said suddenly, leaning in, because that would be a lie too, and it would be every bit as dangerous as false hope. Let me show you what we have already won. And now her pen fairly flew across the napkin, with something like joy. A cancer of the blood that strikes little children, she said, once killed almost every child it ever touched. Almost every single one. And today, we cure roughly 90 out of every 100 of those children. And she drew them running and laughing and growing all the way up into adults with children of their own. A cancer named Hodgkin's, once a certain death sentence, is now among the most curable diseases we know of anywhere. Breast cancers caught early, more than 9 in every 10 of those people surviving. And the newest wonder of them all, she said, where we take a person's own soldiers right out of their body, rebuild them in a laboratory so that they can finally recognize the cancer, and then pour them back in, an army reforged and sent home again, and people who had run out of every other option on Earth have watched their cancer melt away to nothing. She sat back and looked at him. Do you see the pattern in it, Sam? The cancers we have already beaten tend to be the simpler ones, the ones with a clear target to aim at, the ones the army can actually reach. And the ones still standing in front of us, deep in the brain, buried in the pancreas, the ones that spread far and hide well, those are genuinely, deeply, honestly hard. Both of these things are true at the very same time. The progress is completely real, and the rest of it is truly that difficult. A grown-up mind, she said gently, has to learn to hold both of those truths in the same hand at once. And it is all changing faster right now than it ever has before, she said, and Sam could hear the future itself moving in her voice. We have machines now that can read the instruction books of 10,000 different tumors all at once and find hidden patterns in them that no single human mind could ever hope to hold, patterns that quietly whisper to us which treatment will help which particular person. And that very same technology behind the vaccines that the whole world came to know a few years ago, that exact tool is now being turned toward cancer to teach a person's own immune cells the precise face of their own precise tumor, a vaccine built for one single person and one single enemy in all the world. And the earliest trials of it, against some of the very hardest cancers we know, are beginning to show something real. The world your father was diagnosed in today, she said, folding away her pen at last, is simply not the same world where that hopeful law was signed all those years ago. It only looks slow when you are standing up too close to it. The door down the hall opened again, and this time a nurse leaned out and waved Sam inside. His father was sitting up in the bed, a smaller stick figure than Sam somehow remembered, thinner now, a little frail, but with the very same eyes that had watched the moon landing behind him half a century ago. And here was the mercy that Sam would be quietly grateful for every day of the rest of his life. They had found it early. Not by luck alone, but because his stubborn father had finally gone in for a simple, ordinary test that he had almost skipped, almost waved off, almost decided he was too busy for the exact kind of early catch the doctor had just called the one game we can actually win. The road ahead of them would still be long, and it would be hard. But the clock, for once, for them, was on their side. Sam crossed the room, sat down carefully on the edge of the bed, and took his father's thin hand in both of his own. And he did not say, "We are going to beat this," the way people say it in the movies, as though there were only one dragon and one shining sword and one clean ending. He understood far too much now to say a thing like that. Instead, he leaned close, the way his father had once leaned close to him on a living room floor long ago, and he said, quietly and truly, "I understand it now, Pop, all of it. And I am going to be right here with you for every single part of it." His father's thin fingers tightened around his own, weak but perfectly certain, and the old man smiled, the same crooked smile Sam had known across 1,000 ordinary mornings. Then his father spoke, in a voice gone thin and papery, but still unmistakably his own. "I always did tell you," he said, "that we could beat anything." And Sam laughed, a real laugh with the tears still standing in his eyes, because he finally knew exactly what to say back to the man who had once pointed him at the moon. "We can, Pop," he said softly, "just not all at once, one at a time." That is how it was always, always going to be. That night, Sam drove home beneath a wide and clear night sky, and somewhere along a quiet, empty road, he pulled the car over onto the shoulder, and he stepped out, and he looked up, and there it was, the same moon, the same pale moon from the living room floor, the same moon his father had once pointed to and said, "We can beat anything." And standing there alone on the dark roadside, a small stick figure with his face turned up to the light, Sam finally understood that his father had been both wrong and right all along. Wrong, because cancer had never been one single enemy waiting to be conquered in one great triumphant push, one flag planted, one victory declared, one morning when the whole world simply woke to find it gone. It was 200 enemies, each one endlessly changing its shape, some of them still hidden in places we cannot yet reach. There would be no single glorious morning of total victory. But his father had also been right. Right in a far deeper way than either of them could possibly have understood on that living room floor so many years before. Because the war was never truly one war at all. It was 200 quieter wars, fought patiently one at a time. And some of them were already won. The children who now grow up and grow old. The diseases that used to kill without mercy and now simply do not. Some of them were being won at that very moment, in bright labs and quiet hospitals, in 10,000 small and stubborn and unglamorous steps, and some of them would take longer than anyone alive today would like. But the people fighting them were not losing, they were learning. Patiently, relentlessly, humbly, cell by cell, and year by year, they were learning. And at last, Sam saw clearly the thing the doctor had been trying to hand him gently all day long. The thing that was so much better and stronger than any false and easy promise. In medicine, learning and winning are, in the end, the very same thing. He thought of all the quiet names the doctor had shown him that day: the brakes, and the proofreaders, and the noble dying cells, the tireless patrolling army, and the clever hiding tumors. And he understood that every last one of them was a thing that somebody had once had to discover, slowly, alone, in the dark, so that some stranger's father, years later, might live. 50 years of it, 100 years of it. Every small, hard truth, bought with somebody's stubborn patience. It was not the clean and shining victory he had dreamed of as a boy on that living room floor. It was something slower than that, and harder than that, and in a strange and quiet way, it was far more worthy of the word we call hope. He stood and looked up at the moon a moment longer, no longer angry, no longer waiting for a miracle to simply be handed down to him from the sky. Then he climbed back into the car, and he drove home through the dark to help his father begin.